Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to join with my gubernatorial colleagues, Governor Carvel, Governor Tribbttt, and with representatives of the groups that are sponsoring this effort today. Thank you for including me in the program, and of course I'm looking forward to our discussion with the two representatives of the press, Dave Bonar and Jim Flood. The press and the news media in general, as you well know, are essential to the proper functioning of our democracy. If the people are going to fulfill their role in a democracy, they have to know what's going on, have to know the good and the bad in their government. The press shoulders this responsibility. The constitutional right of freedom of the press is, of course, essential for their carrying out this assignment. The elected officials, such as governors, to do their job, they need to communicate effectively with the people. They need to define the problems and opportunities and their plans for dealing with them. They need to motivate the people and gain their support. The news media provide them the pulpit for doing so. The media also provides individual citizens with the opportunity to comment on the issues and to praise or condemn their elected officials. All these things are essential for a democracy to thrive. As I reflect on my experience with the press during my term as governor, I recall the press as a major asset. For example, we never would have enacted the Coastal Zone Act or converted our government to a cabinet form without a strong, sustained effort by the news media. I don't want to overdo this praise. There's plenty of room for both the press and elected officials to improve their performance. For example, I believe the press overemphasizes the negative rather than the positive, and it belabors the present while soft-pedaling the future. I have been deeply involved for years now, nationally and internationally, in the environmental movement. And it's generally true throughout our national press, as well as our local press, that they do not appreciate or really give the attention to the tremendous problems we have in the environmental area and what it means to the quality of life of future generations. Sure, they have an article from time to time, but it ought to be almost a daily emphasis in the news media on this critical program. And we do have the wherewithal to cope with that problem and straighten it out so we can save the earth for future generations. Let me give you an example from my time as governor of how the negative and the present were overemphasized. On June 28, 1971, I had a press conference at which time I signed the Coastal Zone Act into law. This was the most important thing we did in my term, in my view. But when I go to the news files today to try to learn what happened on that day, I can't find one story in the next day's papers about that signing. Why? Because that same day, June 28th, I announced we were going to have a $5.2 million deficit, and I personally took the blame for it. The negative story filled the Delaware papers and reverberated in the local press for months thereafter. The national press, on the other hand, played up the passage of the Coastal Zone Act and ignored the deficit, a more adequate rating of the relative importance of these two items. John Schmadeke, a reporter for the News Journal papers who covered my office, included for months later in his stories about my activities reference to Peterson's deficit. No matter what he's talking about, cutting a ribbon at some opening, He always managed to get into that story, how this horrible deficit was created by the governor. Years later, John came to my office in Washington to apologize for what he had done. He told me that if he had known I wasn't going to lose that election, he never would have done what he had done. And he actually had tears running down his face. He told me this. I said, come on, John, don't be so hard on yourself. There are many reasons why I didn't win that election. But I just cite that as an example of some of the forces at work in the news media and in the governor's office. One of my current complaints about the national press is that it writes about actions by political leaders as though they were reporting for the sports pages. They weigh each action as to how it will affect the next election, not as to how it will serve the people. Getting elected is not the prime goal of our democracy. The prime goal is defining problems and finding solutions to them. As I said at the beginning, both press and elected officials are essential to the flowering of our democracy. We need to work to make that partnership ever more effective. Thank you.